Dear viewers, the following stories are inspired by real events. However, the names of the characters have been changed to protect privacy. Story 1. White Figure in the Warehouse. Ben, whose real name is Michael Johnson, a 23-year-old, worked the night shift as a security guard at an abandoned warehouse in Gary, Indiana, in the summer of 2017. The job was quite boring and lonely. Ben's shift started at 11 p.m. and ended at 7 a.m. And during that time, he usually just sat in the security room, watching the surveillance camera monitors and occasionally patrolling the vast and dark warehouse. This warehouse used to be owned by a steel manufacturing company but had been abandoned for many years after the company went bankrupt. Inside, there was still a lot of old machinery and stacks of goods covered in dust. The dim light from the weak security lights created a cold and eerie atmosphere. Ben often felt a strange presence in this warehouse, but he always tried to reassure himself that it was just his imagination. One Friday night, around 2 a.m., while Ben was reviewing the footage from the surveillance cameras, he suddenly saw a blurry white figure appear at the end of the hallway. The white figure moved very quickly and disappeared behind a large stack of goods. Ben rubbed his eyes, thinking he had seen wrong or perhaps it was just a reflection of light. But a few minutes later, the white figure reappeared. This time it moved slower and seemed to float in the air. Ben felt his hair stand on end. He zoomed in on the image on the screen and saw more clearly. It was a blurry human-like shape, with no clear face, but it exuded a cold and terrifying aura. Ben decided to check the area. He took his flashlight and cautiously stepped out of the security room. When he reached the hallway, he felt a cold draft envelop him. Even though it was summer, Ben felt a chill. He shone his flashlight on the stack of goods where the white figure had disappeared. But he saw nothing. When Ben returned to the security room and reviewed the footage, he was horrified to realize that the white figure had disappeared as soon as he had left the room. And what was even scarier was that, a moment later, the white figure reappeared right behind him on the screen, as if it was watching his every move. That night, strange phenomena continued to occur. Ben saw automatic doors opening and closing on their own, boxes falling off shelves for no reason, and he even heard footsteps and indistinct whispers echoing from somewhere in the warehouse. Ben felt extremely scared. He tried to call his manager, but no one answered. Around 5 a.m., while Ben was patrolling the back area of the warehouse, he suddenly heard a loud crash from inside, as if something very heavy had just fallen. Ben quickly ran inside and shone his flashlight all around. He was horrified to see a white figure standing right in the middle of the warehouse. It was tall and blurry, and it seemed to be looking directly at him. Ben felt his heart stop beating. An overwhelming fear engulfed him, making him unable to move. After seeing the white figure standing in the middle of the warehouse, Ben stood frozen, not daring to move. The white figure also didn't seem to move, just stood there looking at Ben with a terrifying silence. Finally, Ben mustered all his courage and slowly backed away, not daring to turn his back on the white figure. Ben quickly ran back to the security room and locked the door. He sat down, gasping for breath, trying to calm himself. He reviewed the footage from the camera in that area and clearly saw the white figure standing there for several minutes. Then it slowly faded into the air. Ben couldn't believe his eyes. He knew that what he had just witnessed was not a hallucination. Ben called everyone he knew, including his manager and colleagues, but no one believed his story. They thought he was too stressed and had imagined everything. Ben felt alone and helpless. He knew that he was facing something he couldn't explain. As his shift was nearing its end, Ben decided to do one last patrol. He took the crucifix his grandmother had given him and prayed silently. As he walked through the hallway where he had first seen the white figure, he suddenly heard a very faint whisper in his ear. He couldn't make out the words, but the sound sent a chill down his spine. Ben stopped and listened. The whisper came again, this time a little clearer. He heard a thin voice, like that of a child, calling his name. Ben felt incredibly scared. He quickly ran out of the warehouse and didn't dare to look back. The next morning, Ben told his manager the whole story. This time, the manager seemed more serious when he heard him. He promised to review the camera footage and might even hire a paranormal expert to investigate. After reviewing the footage, the manager was shocked to see the white figure that Ben had described. He also heard strange noises in the recording. The manager decided to contact a paranormal investigation team to learn about the history of the warehouse. The paranormal investigation team conducted an investigation and discovered that the warehouse was built on the site of an old cemetery, and there were many trapped spirits there. They believed that the white figure Ben saw was the spirit of a child who had died in an accident at the warehouse many years ago. Eventually, the warehouse was permanently closed, and Ben also moved on to another job. But he never forgot the terrifying nights he had spent at the abandoned warehouse in Gary, Indiana, where he had encountered the mysterious white figure and heard the chilling whispers in the dark. Story 2. Terrifying night shift at Circle K. Jessica, whose real name is Ashley Monroe, a 20-year-old college student, worked the night shift at a Circle K convenience store located on the legendary Route 66. Passing through the town of Kingman, Arizona, in the summer of 2008, this job helped her earn extra income to cover tuition fees. But the night shift in a small, deserted town was usually very boring. Customers were mainly long-haul truck drivers or travelers stopping by for snacks and drinks. Jessica often felt lonely during her shift from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. But she never thought she would encounter something truly terrifying. This Circle K store was quite old. The neon sign outside flickered weakly. Inside the store, the shelves were packed with goods, and the humming of the air conditioner was the only familiar sound. Jessica often spent her free time reading books or surfing the web on the old computer at the checkout counter. She always kept an eye on the surveillance camera monitors, but usually nothing special happened. One Tuesday night, around 3 a.m., while Jessica was halfway through reading a horror novel, she suddenly noticed something unusual on surveillance camera monitor number 3. This camera covered the aisle between two rows of candy shelves. Jessica saw a small black shadow dart across very quickly. It appeared and disappeared in just a split second. Jessica thought it was probably just a stray cat that had wandered into the store. But a few minutes later, the black shadow reappeared. This time it moved slower and seemed to float in the air. Jessica felt a strange unease. She zoomed in on the image on the screen and looked closer. It wasn't an animal, but a bizarre figure, like a small child but with distorted and terrifying features. Jessica felt her hair stand on end. She quickly stood up and went to that aisle to check. But no one was there. The shelves were still intact, with no signs that anyone had just passed by. Jessica told herself that she was probably too tired and hallucinating. She returned to the checkout counter and tried to focus on her book. However, strange phenomena continued to occur. On the camera monitor, Jessica saw candy packages spontaneously falling off the shelves, even though no one was standing nearby. The sound echoing in the quiet night sent chills down Jessica's spine. She began to feel a strange presence in the store. Around 4 a.m., while Jessica was taking inventory at the back of the store, she suddenly heard a very loud crash from the front, as if something had just been smashed. Jessica quickly ran out and saw a soda bottle that had fallen to the floor and shattered. But what was strange was that no one was nearby, and the front door was still tightly closed. Jessica felt extremely scared. She decided to review the footage from camera number 1, which covered the entire checkout counter area and the front door. Upon reviewing, she was horrified to realize something. Right before the soda bottle fell, the camera had recorded the image of a blurry figure standing right behind her. The figure was tall and had no clear face. It just stood there staring at Jessica, and then the soda bottle spontaneously fell. Jessica screamed in terror and backed away, feeling like someone had just touched her shoulder. After seeing the blurry figure on the camera monitor, Jessica almost collapsed. She quickly called her manager, recounting what she had just witnessed. But the manager only reassured her and said that perhaps the camera had malfunctioned. He promised to send someone to check it the next morning. But Jessica still felt incredibly uneasy. Jessica decided not to dare leave the checkout counter. She constantly looked at the camera monitors, afraid that figure would reappear. Around 5 a.m., a customer walked into the store. It was an older man, who looked like a truck driver. He bought a cup of coffee and a pack of cookies and quickly left. Jessica felt a little more relieved when there was someone else in the store. But as soon as the man left, the strange phenomena began again. Jessica heard soft footsteps echoing from aisle number 3, where she had seen the small black shadow earlier. She looked at the camera monitor and clearly saw that no one was there. But the footsteps continued, getting closer. Jessica felt her heart pounding in her chest. She tried to call 911, but her hands were shaking so badly that she couldn't dial the number. The footsteps got closer and closer, and Jessica could clearly hear heavy breathing just outside the checkout counter. Jessica closed her eyes tightly and prayed. She felt a cold draft envelop her, and then she heard a voice whisper right in her ear, "Can you see me?" The voice was thin and eerie, causing Jessica to let out a blood-curdling scream. Jessica opened her eyes and saw a terrifying image right in front of her. A small ghost-like figure, with a distorted face and deep black eyes, was hovering right above the checkout counter. It looked at Jessica with a sinister smile, and Jessica felt as if she was being hypnotized by those terrifying eyes. The ghost-like figure slowly raised a small hand towards Jessica. Its fingers were long and thin, with black fingernails. Jessica tried to back away but couldn't move. She felt completely paralyzed. The ghost-like figure gently touched her cheek, and Jessica felt an icy coldness run down her spine. At that moment, the lights in the store flickered and then went out. Jessica screamed again in the darkness. When the lights came back on, the ghost-like figure had disappeared. But Jessica knew that it was still somewhere in the store, watching her, waiting for an opportunity to return. Jessica ran out of the store and never dared to work the night shift at that Circle K again. What she experienced that night became a terrifying memory that haunted her for the rest of her life. Story 3. Cries in the Lonely Night. Kevin, whose real name is Tyler Davis, a 19-year-old, worked the night shift at a Speedway convenience store located on US 19. Passing through the town of Palm Harbor, Florida, in the fall of 2019. The job was quite boring. But Kevin needed the money to pay for driving lessons and buy the old car he had his eye on. This Speedway store was in a rather deserted area at night, surrounded by sparse residential areas and a few closed shops. Kevin's shift lasted from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., and he was usually the only employee in the store. This Speedway store had a standard layout, with aisles filled with snacks, drinks, and a small area selling coffee and pastries. Kevin usually stood behind the checkout counter, working while listening to music or watching videos on his phone to kill time. He always kept an eye on the surveillance camera monitors. But most of the time, everything was eerily quiet. One Wednesday night, around 1 a.m., while Kevin was cleaning the coffee machine area, he suddenly heard a strange noise coming from the back of the store. It was a small, click sound, as if something had just fallen. Kevin stopped and listened, but heard nothing more. He figured it was probably just a soda can that had rolled off a shelf. But about 10 minutes later, the sound came again, this time louder and clearer, like someone was dragging a heavy object across the floor. Kevin felt a bit uneasy. He looked at the surveillance camera monitors, but saw nothing unusual. He decided to check. Taking the flashlight he usually used to inspect the stockroom, Kevin carefully walked along the aisles, shining his flashlight into the dark corners, but saw no one. He reached the back of the store, where he had heard the sound the first time, but everything was silent. He told himself he was probably just being too sensitive and headed back to the checkout counter. As Kevin sat down on his chair, he suddenly heard a sobbing sound echoing from the customer restroom. The crying sounded very distressed and mournful, sending a chill down Kevin's spine. He was sure that no one was in the restroom at this time. He looked at the surveillance camera monitor. Camera number 4 pointed directly at the restroom door. But the screen showed only a static black image. Kevin felt extremely scared. He didn't know what to do. He tried to call his manager, but no one answered. The crying continued, becoming clearer and more desperate. Kevin felt like someone was begging for help. He decided he had to check what was happening, even though he was very frightened. Kevin took his flashlight and slowly approached the restroom. As he got closer, he heard the crying getting louder, and he could also hear faint banging on the door from the inside. Kevin hesitantly reached out and opened the restroom door, and what he saw inside horrified him. The door swung open, and Kevin saw that no one was inside. But the crying continued to echo, as if it was coming from the wall itself. After opening the restroom door and seeing no one inside, Kevin stood frozen in place, unable to believe what he had just experienced. The crying continued to echo, as if a child was sobbing softly in the darkness. Kevin quickly backed away and ran towards the checkout counter. He slumped down in his chair, trying to calm himself. Kevin reviewed the footage from camera number 4, which pointed directly inside the restroom. He watched it over and over, but no one appeared or left during the time he heard the crying. This made Kevin even more confused and scared. He knew that what he had just heard was not a hallucination. Kevin decided to call a close friend named Sarah, whose real name is Emily Carter, who often worked the night shift at another convenience store nearby. He told Sarah about the strange things happening at his store. Sarah listened and also felt worried, advising Kevin to call the police. Kevin hesitated, unsure if the police would believe his story. While he was thinking, the crying started again, this time louder and clearer. Kevin could clearly hear muffled sobs and faint calls of, "Mommy." He couldn't take it anymore. He decided to call the police. When the police arrived and heard Kevin's story, they seemed a bit skeptical but still agreed to check the store. They walked around, checked the restroom and other areas, but found no signs of anyone else. They advised Kevin to rest and said that perhaps he was just too stressed. After the police left, Kevin felt more alone and scared than ever. The crying continued, non-stop. Kevin looked at the surveillance camera monitors, and he suddenly noticed something strange. On camera number 4, he saw a blurry figure standing in the corner of the restroom. It was the image of a small child, hugging its face and sobbing. Kevin was utterly horrified. He couldn't believe his eyes. He zoomed in on the image on the screen and looked closer. It was indeed a ghost. Blurry and translucent, it didn't seem to notice Kevin's presence. Just stood there crying alone. Kevin felt a mixture of sympathy and fear well up inside him. He wondered what had happened to this child. The next morning, when the manager arrived, Kevin showed him the footage from the surveillance camera. The manager was also incredibly shocked to see the ghost of the child. They then researched the history of the store and discovered that there had been a serious traffic accident on this land before, resulting in the death of a little girl. They believed that the ghost Kevin saw was the spirit of that child, still lost and suffering. Eventually, Kevin quit his job at the Speedway store. He could never forget the terrifying nights he had experienced, and the mournful cries of the child always haunted his dreams. If you want to hear more true horror stories, don't forget to subscribe to my channel.